Have you ever felt like you were surrounded by people, yet completely forgotten? As if your presence were just another shadow in the back of the room? I remember exactly the day this question entered my head and never left. Why didn't anyone look at me? It was as if I existed only on paper. I was there, doing everything right, but no matter how hard I tried, no one saw, no one noticed. And that, I can tell you with a heavy heart, hurts more than any scream or insult. Because the silence of indifference carries a weight that only those who have borne it can explain. I wasn't just any woman. I had desires, I had strength, and above all, a faith that kept me from collapsing completely. But for a long time, that faith was the only one that answered me when I asked, "Am I invisible?" I grew up like that, feeling like a detail in the corner of other people's lives. The daughter who helped without complaining. The neighbor who always listened more than she spoke. The woman who erased her own pain to keep everyone comfortable. And even with my chest full of silence, I smiled, because I was taught that a strong woman can endure, and I did. But you know what's cruelest? It's when forgetfulness doesn't just come from strangers. It comes from those who should love you, from those who shared your table, your dreams, and your prayers. Emotional abandonment doesn't leave marks on your body, but it corrodes you from within. It's a kind of loneliness that can't be explained properly. You just have to feel it. And it was by experiencing this that I began to talk more to God than to people. Because while everyone else looked at each other, I spoke to Him in my mind. It was in the church pew while cleaning the floor no one else wanted to clean that I wept silently and said, "See me, Lord, only see me." Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt invisible in your own story? Because what you're about to discover may surprise you. Sometimes, what the world ignores is precisely what God sets aside for something greater. And I'm not here to tell a sad story. I'm here to share a truth that can change the way you see your own journey. Because when everyone forgot about me, that's when my life really began to happen. I remember it like it was yesterday. The church's anniversary, the celebration filled with important figures, neatly pressed clothes, rehearsed smiles, and there I was, broom in hand, taking care of what no one saw. But I saw. I knew exactly where each pew creaked, where the light burned out, where the pastor forgot the previous week's papers. I knew every corner of that place, not out of vanity, but because of presence. While others passed, I remained. And that day, amidst the noise of the clapping and the hymns, I realized that the one thing I never lacked was constancy, the silent commitment, the love that demands no recognition. Stay with me until the end, because this story will unfold. And it wasn't magic, it wasn't luck, it was a journey, it was surrender. And yes, there was pain, but there was also healing. And most beautiful of all, there was justice, not the kind that screams, but the kind that builds, the kind that, over time, reveals who truly sustained what seemed forgotten. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. And as the days went by, I realized that, even without a stage, even without a name on the posters, I was part of the structure, one of those who don't appear, but if they leave, everything collapses. And this awareness, look, gave me a strength I didn't know I had, because while many sought the spotlight, I had already found purpose. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was true. And that's why, if at any point in this conversation something touched you deep down, something that reminded you of yourself or someone you know, leave it here in the comments. Write what struck you, what made you think. Because when you share, you help others not feel so alone on this road. Sometimes a comment can be exactly what someone needed to read to keep going, too. If this story resonated with you, please leave a like. It shows that this kind of content matters, that these stories that come from the depths of the soul still have a place in such a noisy world. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, real, profound, full of truth, subscribe to the channel. Your presence here is what keeps all this going. Now I'm going to tell you what happened when, after so many years of sweeping the corners of the church, I discovered that that place could also be mine. I grew up where the walls knew more about me than the people. There were days when the silence in the house was so heavy it hurt my skin, not because of the peace, but because of the absence. Because even with people passing by, talking, eating, I remained invisible. It was as if I were part of the scenery, that chair that's always there, but no one notices if it's broken. And what struck me most wasn't even the lack of words. It was the way eyes averted their gaze, the way my presence always seemed out of place. Even my birthday was just another day, if they even remembered. And it's curious how childhood shapes what we come to believe about ourselves. I thought I deserved little, that being forgotten was natural, a silent punishment that came for no reason. I grew up with this feeling of being left over, even within my own home. And the most painful of all? It was realizing that affection, the kind that should come free, always seemed to have a price. I saw siblings being held in my arms, heard stories of affection that didn't include my name, and that created a hole in me that not even time knew how to fill. I had to learn, very early on, to create my own emotional shelter, to make up stories in my head, to play alone, to comfort myself when my chest tightened. And as sad as it may sound, that's what made me strong. It was there that a woman began to emerge who would know how to survive abandonment. A woman who would understand, years later, the value of presence, especially when no one truly offers it. At school, it was a similar feeling. I'd sit in the back, speak softly, answer correctly, but without raising my hand. Not out of shyness, but because I'd already learned, when you don't attract attention, it's easier not to be disappointed. But inside, I carried an overwhelming desire to be seen. For someone, just once, to look at me with that glow that says, "You matter." Faith, in the beginning, wasn't even faith. It was refuge. Church became the only place where my shadow seemed less heavy. And yet, I wasn't one of those who spoke in tongues or got emotional at the altar. I'd stay there, in the corner, arranging the chairs, washing the floor with more care than most people treat words. And every sermon I heard, even without understanding everything, was like a reminder that there was something greater, something that might see me. Because until then, I felt like not even God remembered my name. But this is what time reveals, that pain, when it doesn't destroy us, sculpts us. The rejection I felt didn't make me cruel. It made me someone capable of seeing what others hide. I learned to see sadness behind smiles, to hear what's unsaid. And this sensitivity, born from pain, later became my greatest gift. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what happened next, in my youth, was what really began to change my understanding of life. When we grow up with invisible scars, it's easy to fall into emotional traps without realizing it. And that's exactly what happened to me. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Because sometimes, only those who have been through it understand how much this kind of silence can mark an entire life. Loneliness became my old acquaintance. It wasn't that noisy loneliness, full of shouts and slamming doors. It was a tiny, whispered loneliness that hid in the automatic gestures of everyday life. I woke up, did what needed to be done, smiled when someone looked at me, but inside, all was silence. A silence that no longer hurt like before. But that shaped my steps, my thoughts, even the way I breathed. There were days when I'd cross the street just to feel the wind on my face and remind myself I was still here. Because when no one calls you, when no one misses you, time becomes a hard thing to carry. And it was in this weariness that I stumbled upon faith, not like a divine light that descends and magically transforms everything, but like a wooden pew in the back of a church that seemed empty, but welcomed me without demanding anything. And that was already so much more than the rest of the world offered me. The church didn't promise me miracles, nor applause, nor hugs, but it offered me presence, a place where, at least there, I wasn't a burden, a shadow, or a forgotten piece. I was just one among many, but with room to breathe. It was in this place, of simplicity and silence, that I began to build a new relationship with myself. Not with guilt, but with courage. I listened to the pastor's words as if listening for a hidden message. Every sermon, even the harshest, felt like a letter someone had written to me without realizing it. And if there was one phrase that stuck with me forever, it was this: God does not forget what the world discards. It stuck with me in a strange way, because I had already been discarded, by people, by moments, by promises. But there was someone, or something, telling me that my pain wasn't invisible forever. I started volunteering to help with chores, not because I wanted to be seen, but because, for the first time, I wanted to be part of something. And there, Sweeping the floor, preparing tea, arranging chairs before the service, I realized that even in silence, my presence could make an impact. It was as if, little by little, my existence found purpose. Not a grandiose, headline-grabbing purpose, but a serene purpose, one built steadily. Deep down, I still carried wounds. That doesn't change overnight, but there was also a silent transformation happening within me. I began to look in the mirror with more kindness. I began to value my own company. I began to realize that what I lacked in the outside world, I could cultivate within. And that changes everything. Because when we change our mindset, we change the type of pain we accept to carry. And that's when an idea began to grow. It wasn't an ambition, it was more of a seed. I looked at that small church, forgotten by many, and thought, if this place welcomed me when no one else did, perhaps I too can care for it, as it cared for me. It was a timid thought at first, but that's how great decisions are born. In silence, in subtlety, in the hidden truth of a heart that has grown tired of waiting to be chosen. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this story that began with abandonment, loneliness, and silence took a turn I couldn't even imagine. What seemed like a temporary refuge turned into an unexpected journey, full of revelations that changed not only the course of my life, but also the way I came to see my worth. Right there, I'm on this journey too. Only those who have felt invisible know how powerful it is to decide not to disappear. Even there, in that space that was supposed to be welcoming, I discovered that judgment even wears Sunday clothes. As I swept the floor at the church entrance or straightened the pews before service, I heard the whispers. They weren't loud, but they carried weight. Sometimes they came in the form of glances that pierced me endlessly. Other times, in brief smiles that didn't reach my eyes. It was as if, even there, surrounded by sermons about love and compassion, I was just part of the furniture, useful, silent, and invisible. I didn't want the spotlight. I didn't seek recognition. But it hurt to realize that the people who spoke of mercy out loud didn't bother to know my name. I was that lady who helps, and that was it. They passed me by as if I were the rag that cleaned the floor or the glass that carried water to the pulpit. And the worst part is that for a long time, I accepted this as natural, as if it were my place, as if my existence always needed to be squeezed into other people's corners. But there comes a point when even silence screams. And mine screamed. It screamed when I realized the faith that sustained me needed no audience. It screamed when I understood my worth didn't depend on recognition. It screamed when, even without hearing my name, I kept showing up, every day, because I knew my presence there wasn't for nothing. I wasn't looking for a pat on the back. I was looking for meaning. And, as contradictory as it may seem, sometimes it's in contempt that we find ourselves. It was at this point that my mindset began to shift. I stopped waiting. I stopped bowing. I stopped believing that being invisible meant being small, because, in truth, I was a giant. It's just that no one had stopped to see. And that's okay. I started to see. I started to respect my limits, my pain, my merits, and every gesture I made there, no matter how simple, carried this new hidden truth. I existed, and my story mattered, even if it was ignored by the eyes of others. Over time, I realized I wasn't the only one who felt this way. Other women, other ladies, other girls, all with that look that demanded silence but screamed for belonging. And that's when it hit me. Perhaps my journey had a greater purpose. Perhaps I had been placed there not to be noticed, but to be a beacon. Not the kind of beacon that shines brightly and draws attention, but the kind that's discreet, that only those who need it see. The one that lights up slowly, that illuminates forgotten corners, that guides with constancy. I began to listen more, looking beyond appearances, paying attention to the hidden depths of faith where the pains that aren't confessed even in prayer reside. I saw the impact of a kind word, a thoughtfully served coffee, a sincere, "I'm here." That's how I understood it wasn't just about me. It was about us, about all those people the church didn't see, but whom God never forgot. And it was in this inner movement, in this silent transformation, that the seed I had kept long ago began to blossom. A different will, a desire not only to serve, but to build, to create a space where no one was invisible, where every name had value, where every story found shelter. Not out of vanity, but out of justice, for truth, for love. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened next was something not even the judges on duty could have predicted. The forgotten woman who cleaned the benches found herself in a position no one believed she could reach. Comment. That makes sense to me. Sometimes, all we need is to be seen by those who truly listen with their hearts. It was on a cloudy afternoon that life bluntly showed me that there was no one holding my hand anymore. The news came like a dry wind, direct, without warning. Someone had left, and with that departure, a part of me was gone too. It wasn't just the pain of absence that frightened me, but the echo of the silence afterward. No visits, no calls, no, "Are you okay?" It was as if the world had moved on, and I was left sitting at the station, alone, with a suitcase full of stories no one wanted to hear anymore. It was at that moment that something inside me snapped, but not in the sense of breaking. It was a different kind of rupture, more like childbirth, as if that pain needed to exist to push me out of a place that no longer held me. The hidden truth was this. I had been surviving on autopilot, waiting for crumbs of attention, like someone begging for affection with their eyes. But that day, sitting on the edge of the bed, my heart aching, I understood that if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would. The transformation began silently. No big decisions, no revolutions, just small gestures, washing my face with more intention, walking to the market, looking up at the sky, sitting upright in the church pew, even though everything still hurt inside. These tiny, almost invisible choices were the first bricks on the new path. I was rebuilding something, and for the first time, it wasn't for anyone else. It was for myself. Over time, I came to understand that some losses aren't an end, but a new beginning. They open up clearings. They clear the ground so we can finally see our own roots. That's how I realized that, even though I'd been forgotten, ignored, diminished, I was still there, whole, even if full of cracks. And do you know the beauty of that? The cracks let in the light. It was through them that I began to see my own strength. A strength that doesn't shout, that doesn't impose itself, but that remains firm, even when the world falls apart. It's curious how, when we lose everything, we also free ourselves from so much. I stopped waiting for what would never come. I stopped trying to fit in where there was never room for me. And with this new mindset, I began to chart a different path. A path where I was the author, not just a supporting character in my own story. A path where I didn't ask for permission to exist, where I didn't need anyone to tell me I had value. People continued to pass me by as before. Some still looked at me with disdain. Others pretended not to see. But I saw myself. And that changed everything. Because when we truly see ourselves, even the mirror begins to reflect something else. The impact of this shift was profound. I began to occupy spaces I'd previously avoided. I began to say no without guilt. I began to make choices aligned with how I felt, not with what was expected of me. And little by little, this dormant version of myself that lived within began to awaken. The behind the scenes of this journey were marked by long nights, difficult memories, and costly decisions, but also by moments of peace I'd never felt before, a peace that didn't depend on anyone, that lived within me, and this peace grew stronger with each step I took toward myself. It wasn't about being recognized anymore. It was about being whole, about going out there without needing to explain myself, about carrying dignity like someone carrying a flame burning within their heart. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because one day, after so much invisibility, I was called to the front, not out of pity, not out of charity, but out of recognition. And that day, everything changed. Comment. I'm on this journey too. Sometimes, it's in the silence of loss that we find the truest sound of our strength. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because after everything I've been through, the abandonment, the silence, the judgmental stares, came something almost no one sees, a new beginning. Not the kind filled with announcements, parties, and applause, but the kind of new beginning that happens when no one's looking, when only God and you know the effort it takes to get out of bed and keep going, even with your heart still broken. It was there, in the darkness of dawn, with a broom in hand and my mind full of questions, that I began to rebuild my life. There was no spotlight. There was no pat on the back. Just the church floor to sweep, the chairs to line up, and an altar that, even without saying a word, looked back at me as if to say, "Keep going." And I kept going. Because when we've lost everything, even the dust has meaning. Every clean corner was like a weight lifted from my chest. I learned a lot during these silent shifts. I learned about discipline, about presence, about how every little thing can be a prayer. While many slept, I was already up, preparing everything for the morning service. It was as if that place, which had previously ignored me, little by little began to recognize me, not by my appearance, but by my constancy, not by what I said, but by what I did. And deep down, that's more valuable than any title. Some people started to notice. First, there were curious looks, then subtle questions. "Are you the one who organizes everything here?" But I didn't say much. I didn't want applause. I wanted peace, and peace sometimes requires silence. I gradually became involved in the administration. A lost paper I'd find and return, an account I'd organize, a problem I'd solve without anyone asking. I saw what no one else saw, and this attentive, unobtrusive gaze opened doors. But I didn't rush in. I entered slowly, with the respect of someone who already knows the cost of each step. I learned, observing. Every meeting I quietly attended, every decision I listened to without interrupting, was like a leadership course that life gave me without charging a fee. And deep down, it was more than learning. It was preparing myself. Because some journeys require patience. It's not just about arriving. It's about arriving ready. While I was caring for the church, I was also caring for myself. I discovered that there's strength in routine, that doing simple things well transforms everything around you, that keeping your faith alive even when nothing makes sense is the greatest act of courage anyone can perform. And there, in those cold dawns and silent mornings, I was strengthening myself, not to prove anything to anyone, but to never again forget who I am. Looking back, I realized that many people go through phases like this, where everything seems small, hidden, insignificant. But it's behind the scenes that character is formed. It's there that mindsets change, that we understand that dignity doesn't depend on the stage, that the deepest impact is the one that begins in the invisible. And that's why I kept going. Because even if no one noticed, God saw, and He knew. Over time, some doors began to open naturally. People came to me for help, advice, and direction. And everything that I'd previously felt was empty now filled with purpose. But I still didn't rush. Because when you've been left behind so many times, you learn that everything that comes too fast can disappear just as quickly. I'd rather build slowly, with a solid foundation, brick by brick, with faith and resilience. This silent restart taught me more than any course or lecture. It taught me about presence, about serving without expecting anything in return, about planting even when no one believes it will grow, and above all, it taught me about myself, about the woman I am. The woman who didn't give up even when the world seemed to forget. Write down, "This makes sense to me." Because maybe you're also in that moment of new beginnings, where everything seems too small to matter. But believe me, the invisible of today can be the foundation of your tomorrow. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there comes a moment in life when everything you've done in silence, everything you've faced in silence, everything you've built with wounded hands and a whole heart begins to reveal itself to others, even if you never asked for recognition. It was like that for me. After so many years of caring for that temple, as if caring for one's own soul, one day, the key came to me. And it wasn't just any key. It was the key to trust, to leadership, to the house where I was once invisible. That morning still lives vividly within me. The pastor, already aged, weary, with the eyes of someone who knew more than he was letting on, called me to the corner of the altar. It wasn't a day of worship. It was empty, just the two of us and the echo of the stories that place had once held. He held a small set of keys and looked at me as if he saw beyond. He said, "You know more about this church than anyone. If anyone should take care of it, it's you." And he placed the key in my hand. I didn't cry there. I held the weight of emotion as firmly as I had held loneliness for so many years. But inside, it was as if all the pieces that had once shattered within me were being reassembled. That key was more than an object. It was an answer, a silent confirmation that all the effort, all the presence without applause, all the invisible surrender, had not been in vain. And see, it wasn't luck. It was construction. It was mindset. While many sought immediate recognition, I was laying the groundwork. While eyes were on those on stage, I was taking care of the behind the scenes, those clean benches, the changed flower vases, the organized accounts, the put-away papers. None of this shone in the meetings, but it kept the church afloat. And real impact in the end is always built where no one sees it. The key brought more than responsibility. It brought back memories. It reminded me of the girl who cleaned the floor in the early hours of the morning, without really knowing why. It made me look within and see the woman who, even though hurt, decided to stay, who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard, who never used pain as an excuse, but as fuel. And that's why this moment is so precious to me, because it wasn't given, it was earned. It wasn't asked for, it was acknowledged. Leadership didn't change who I was. It only allowed me to do even more for that place that had been my refuge when no one else would see me. Now, with the key in my hand, I could open doors that before I'd only seen from afar. And the most beautiful thing is that, even there, with decision-making power, I didn't lose my essence. He continued serving coffee, sweeping the floor, tending the flowers, because true transformation doesn't exchange humility for position. It strengthens identity. There, in that time of transition, I learned about authority with love, about silent decisions, about how to lead without having to command. And perhaps this is the greatest revelation of this journey, that true power comes not from what is handed to you, but from what you build when no one is watching. Every choice, every sacrifice, every late night without recognition was like a small brick in this new phase of my story. Some were surprised, of course. People who'd never asked my name, but now came with smiles on their faces, some out of interest, others out of regret. And me? I smiled back, because those who've been to the bottom don't have time to hold grudges. They have an urgency to make it count. And I wanted that church to be more than a building. I wanted it to be a shelter, a voice, a cure for those who'd once felt forgotten. Responsibilities increased, decisions weighed heavily, but faith, that old companion, always guided me. Every time I opened that door with the key in my hand, it was as if I were saying to myself, "You won, not against anyone, but for yourself." And this victory is the most beautiful of all, the one born from the hidden truth we carry within us, the one that only reveals itself when we no longer need to prove anything to anyone. Comment: I'm on this journey too, because maybe you're also building in silence, waiting for the world to see. But believe me, your time will come. And when it does, may you be ready, not to seek revenge, but to serve with even more love. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something powerful about observing the change in the eyes of someone who once passed you by without seeing. I don't say this arrogantly. I speak with the serenity of someone who has hit rock bottom and decided to transform every drop of that pain into wisdom. The curious thing is that this turnaround didn't come from a resounding achievement. There was no announcement from the pulpit, nor a public acclaim. It was like a seed sprouting after a harsh winter, slowly, silently, but powerfully. At first, it was just curious looks. The same people who previously only noticed me when I was mopping began calling me by name. Not sister, not that lady, by my name. Then came the requests for opinions. One or another would approach with small but weighty questions. Do you think I should take this job? What would you do if you were in my shoes? And I answered as I always have, calmly, listening, truthfully. Because I've always known one thing: the respect earned in silence has deeper roots than momentary applause. As the months passed, I realized I no longer needed to explain who I was. All I had to do was walk into the church, and the atmosphere changed. Not out of fear, but out of consideration. People knew what that woman had experienced there, even without knowing the details. My presence began to carry the authority of a journey of resilience, firm decisions, unknown behind the scenes, and unwavering faith. And do you know the most beautiful thing about all this? I didn't need to raise my voice or demand recognition. I simply remained who I'd always been, a whole woman, even when the world was tearing me apart. There was one day in particular that stood out for me. We were organizing an important leadership meeting. It was one of those situations where, some time ago, I wouldn't even have been invited. And there I was, leading the organization, with my opinion heard and respected. When I suggested a change that years before would have been ignored, everyone accepted it naturally. And that's when it hit me. I was no longer a behind-the-scenes assistant. I was a role model. And not because I asked, but because my journey had put me there. It's strange, isn't it? Because I spent my entire life being the forgotten person, the one who cleaned the dirtiest corners of the church and the house, the one who made coffee for the meetings I was never invited to, the one who heard whispers but received no invitations. And today, there are people who seek me out just to hear a word, who say, "When I grow up, I want to have your strength." I smile, but deep inside I carry a hidden truth. This strength wasn't born of praise. It was born of rejection, of abandonment, of the nights when only God and I knew how much it hurt not to be remembered. But you see, I never let that pain turn into resentment. I never treated anyone who once ignored me coldly, because resentment only slows our transformation. I wanted more. I wanted to be a bridge, not a wall. I wanted my story to be not just a warning, but a beacon. And that's how, little by little, I became part of the heart of that community. Not as a heroine, but as someone who resisted without hardening, who cried without becoming a victim, who was left aside, but never lost faith. It's also curious how everything falls into place at the right time. That invisible girl who grew up without hearing praise is now mentioned in meetings. That woman who once asked, "Why doesn't anyone see me?" now hears, "What do you see that we haven't yet?" Life's answer didn't come with shouts or trophies. It came with genuine recognition, built on the foundation of consistency, constant presence, and silent service. And I truly believe that this is the kind of legacy that never fades. Because when we become a reference without needing to compete for a platform, our strength inspires without needing to convince. And perhaps that's exactly what keeps me going to this day, knowing that every rejection I faced prepared me to be heard more deeply, that every time I was left out, it was just life preparing me for a place that didn't depend on invitations. Right there, I'm on this journey too. Because if you feel like you're building in silence, that you haven't been seen yet, that your story seems invisible, know that this could be shaping something much bigger than you imagine. Would you like me to continue with the next section of the script? It starts with, "Today, the name they ignored is on the front sign." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because sometimes life returns us to old chapters, but with the page turned on our side. That's exactly what I felt the day that figure from my past walked through the church door. He entered slowly, his eyes downcast, his body carrying a weariness I knew all too well, not physical, but the kind that comes from the soul. It was a face I hadn't seen in decades, but one that, deep down, still left its mark on me, not out of malice, nor from deep wounds, but because, at the time when I needed someone most, he too turned his back. The scene was silent, but charged with impact. He sat on the last bench, unsure of where he was truly standing. Perhaps he had come by chance. Perhaps someone had recommended that temple as a place of solace. What he didn't expect was that, behind that ancient wooden door, stood the very woman he had once ignored. Not as revenge, it was never about that, but as a cycle that, after so many twists and turns, brings back the opportunity to look in the mirror. And the strangest thing of all is that, at that moment, my heart wasn't filled with resentment or pride. I felt a kind of compassion that only maturity can give us, because I knew who I'd become. I knew how far I'd come to be there, standing firm, whole. And what he needed in that moment wasn't judgment. It was someone who knew what it was like to fall and still keep going. He came to me with a simple request, nothing that required great sacrifice, but it did require emotional surrender, prayer. Life had dismantled the castle he'd built, believing it would never crumble. And now, he sought something that couldn't be bought, peace. When he looked me in the eye and said, "Could you pray for me?" time froze. It was as if everything I'd experienced up until that point had served as a catalyst for that moment. I could have said many things. I could have reminisced about the past, thrown old truths on the table, made him swallow every gesture of contempt, but I chose the silence that builds. I took his hands firmly, looked him in the eye and said, "Of course I can. And I will." Because in that moment, he wasn't standing before the invisible woman he'd been before. He was standing before someone who had been shaped by pain, but who chose not to carry stones. As I prayed, I felt a kind of healing I hadn't even expected. He wasn't the only one who needed comfort. I, too, was being freed from an old pain. The transformation wasn't just about me being there as the owner of the church. It was about my ability to serve those who once turned their backs on me. And not out of weakness, but out of strength. The strength of having overcome, of having rebuilt my identity, of having understood that dignity isn't about applause, it's about presence. After that day, other people from the past also reappeared. Some asking for help with their children, others with failing health, others just wanting to talk, and all were met with the same look, firmness and empathy, because those who carry the truth don't need to protect themselves with pride. And those who have lived in the shadows know exactly the value of reaching out, even to those who once didn't. I didn't become a role model just because I held a position. I became one because I chose not to carry the weight of grief. Because each of these reunions taught me that life tests us, not only when we suffer, but when we have the chance to give back, to show that maturing is much more about how we treat others than about what we achieve. The journey taught me that the greatest victories don't make noise. They happen deep within, behind the scenes of the soul, when we recognize ourselves fully in the face of those who tried to diminish us. And the most beautiful thing is that, by embracing those who forgot me, I also healed the forgotten child who once lived within me. That child who asked, "Why doesn't anyone see me?" now embraces firmly and says, "I see you, even if you've never seen me." And perhaps that's what moves me most. Knowing that I could have followed another path, harder, colder, more cynical, but I chose what builds. I chose to make my name a shelter, not a burden, and no one can take that away from me. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Because if life has also put you in front of someone from the past, and you chose peace, then we have a lot in common. Want me to continue with the next part? It starts with, today, when someone walks through that door, they know that a whole story lives there. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there are lessons that life delivers silently, but that shape us more powerfully than any shout. What I experienced taught me that what truly counts are not the eyes that see us, but the ones that see us. And God, oh, God always saw. When no one reached out, when not even my name was remembered, He already knew my strength. He knew my journey. He knew what I would still build, even if at the time I didn't quite believe it myself. For many years I wanted to understand why certain things happened to me, why I was the forgotten one, the one left aside, the one only remembered when someone needed me. But after so much walking, I realized maybe I really needed to hit rock bottom, not to suffer, but to learn to climb out on my own. Because climbing with help is good, but climbing with faith is transformative. Life didn't hand me answers on a silver platter. It handed me processes. And it was in these often painful processes that I discovered the hidden truth behind rejection. My value wasn't diminished because others didn't see it. It was simply hidden, waiting for the right time to blossom. And when that time came, it didn't come with applause or a red carpet. It came with responsibility, with conscious decisions, with real impact. I went from invisible to role model without stepping on anyone, without making a fuss, just by being who I am, with dignity, with poise, with self-love. Today, when someone walks through that church door, they might see only a woman sitting up front, a white-haired lady with a serene gaze. But what few know is the journey behind that gaze, the behind-the-scenes of everything that happened here. Every pew I cleaned, every candle I lit, every prayer said at dawn, alone, in the dark. None of this has been forgotten, because God sees. Even when human eyes pass by, He sees. He has always seen. And that's what gives me peace, knowing that my story doesn't need to be shouted from the rooftops to have value. It just needs to be lived truthfully. And it was this truth that sustained me. In days of abandonment, of loss, of silent new beginnings, it was this truth that guided me when strength failed me and only faith remained. If you're carrying a similar pain, if you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever wondered, does anyone see me? Know this, your value isn't in the attention you get. It's in what you build even when no one's looking. Because one day, the world will change. And when it does, you'll be ready. Comment here. I do exist because your voice matters, your story matters, and I'm here, for real, reading every word. If you've stayed with me this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. And maybe, like me, you've also felt like no one saw you. But look, we found each other here, in this space, with words that unite different stories, yet such similar feelings. If this content resonated with you, if any part of it resonated with you, please like this video. It helps keep this space alive, full of stories that deserve to be heard with an open heart. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is more than a story. It's a way to transform pain into strength, the past into learning, and silence into presence. And if you made it all the way to the end, leave a comment below. I'm with you until the end. I read everything with care, and believe me, this exchange is what keeps it all going. There's a video here that complements this conversation in a way you might not even expect. Click and continue with me there. The story isn't over yet.